So welcome back to our series on developing your intuition. And today we're going to talk about several different topics. We're going to talk about coincidence. We're going to talk about skepticism that can arise when we have intuitive messages come in. And we're going to talk about synchronicities, right? So I'm going to share a number of examples from my own life. And then, we're going to have a chance after this recording is paused to get together and really dive deep in and talk about these synchronicities and ways that things have showed up for us, the messages that come in. So recently, I felt a calling to reread this book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves. And this book has been foundational in one of the many books that have been foundational in my understanding of self and really the reclamation of my inner and outer kind of wild woman archetype, the part of myself that doesn't feel the need to always conform to societal standards or other people's expectations. And so it's been very empowering. And I read it a number of years ago and it popped back up in my intuitive nudges. And I said, okay, I receive. And this morning before this call, I read a chapter where, and this author, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, an amazing psychologist, uses story and metaphor to teach and to describe common human archetypes and human archetypal situations. And so she uses this myth, this story that's present in some forms in different cultures, called the three golden hairs. And so basically in this myth, you find a man wandering through the forest, and he is absolutely exhausted. He is at the limit of what he can do physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, just stumbling around in the darkness. And he sees this little light of her cottage, and he drops to the floor right in front of her door. And the wise elder woman opens the door and brings him inside. Sets him by the fire to get warm again. And she begins to rock him. She holds him in her arms and she begins to rock him, sing to him, just soothing and nurturing him. And she does this all night long. And as she does it, at the beginning, he's exhausted, he's drained, he's physically incapacitated. And as she begins to rock him and nurture him, he slowly becomes younger and younger and younger. And by the time he gets to the morning light, she looks down to see that he has actually become a young, beautiful little boy again, a young child. And he's sort of glowing, with that vitality that children often have. And before this elder woman decides to release him back into the forest, into the wild world, she plucks three hairs from, three golden hairs from his head and drops them to the ground. And the author tells us that the sound of those hairs hitting the ground is a wake-up call for our spirit, that now there is space to invite a new chapter to begin. And there was a particular passage in this book this morning that really touched me at a deep level. And she writes, when we're engaged in writing our manuscript or caregiving for a family member, we naturally can reach a point of exhaustion as the masculine energy within us is finite. We need to, at that point, simply pause, rest, breathe, rock ourselves and our ideas and our life force back into vitality. And when I read this passage, I felt like she was speaking directly to me. Because in 2021, I was at the very end of a 4.5-year process of being a caregiver for my grandmother, right? I was literally caregiving for a family member. And she passed from the earthly plane in September of last year. And right after that, I felt this strong draw to write and publish a book. I did it in about 3.5 weeks, which is not something I necessarily recommend, but it felt really important to get this book out into the world. And then I moved to a different home the very next month. So 3 huge major things happened in my life. And then I collapsed into the arms of the universe. right? In December and January, I lost my mojo. I basically could not hardly work. I didn't feel passionate about anything. And what I realized is I just needed to rest. I had reached that finite level. I'd reached the limit of my doingness, and I just needed to be. And so I did all kinds of things to nurture and care for myself. And little bit by little bit, I became re-energized, reconnected with self, reconnected with spirit. And since then, since that time, I literally was looking back and thinking, what were the 3 golden hairs that I dropped to the floor? And there were 3 key things that I had a really deep attachment to, that I had considered in the past to be so precious. But in the letting go, I took a lot of weight off of my shoulders. I was reborn. I regained my vitality, my creative flow, my spark for life, and my passion for this soul work. And when we're talking about synchronicity, right, let's just talk about the fact that Dr. Estes wrote this book in 1992. And I didn't become a caregiver for my grandmother for 15 years after this book was published. I didn't publish my own book until 19 years after her book was published. And I did not read this passage until 20 years after she wrote it. And still, it spoke directly to me. The words, the phrasing, the examples were exactly what it is that I have been dealing with. And so I'm reading a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. And when I do my daily oracle readings, as I do, here's who shows up. Here's the wolf spirit. He showed up like 3 days in a row, just howling at the moon, right? Regaining his wildness, regaining his vitality, coming out of that cold, snowy, kind of frozen state and re-energizing himself. And this is that masculine energy, right? Where we can go out and we can do and we can be in the world. And then this morning, this was the one I received, which was the clan, the clan of the wolf heart. It says, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And so I really just can't even make this up. Like, these literally came out, the wolf spirit came out over and over and over. So there's one example of the ways that an intricate synchronicity can show up in our lives, can provide messages for us. I have a couple of other ones here. Several days ago, I was on a call with a coaching client who mentioned that he was reading this book, Soulcraft. It's an amazing, amazing book. And I bought this book about 10 years ago when I first found out that I was a highly sensitive person, or I awakened to that fact. I've always been a highly sensitive person. And I was at a retreat, and it just called to me, right? It called to me. And when I got off of the coaching call, I went over to my bookshelf and I opened it up. And I said, I'm just going to open to a random page. And so I did. And the story that he was talking about was dream interpretation. And he was describing how this man that he knew had a really powerful dream about 2 women, right? One woman was in a blue dress and one woman was in a red dress. And each of these women, as they sat and they broke it down, because the author is, I believe, a Jungian analyst, and he works with people on dream interpretation. They realized that this was a choice point. It was a really important timeline that this man was going to walk, and he had to decide between 2 different aspects. Now, I read this, last week, and the day before this, I found out that my partner had never seen the movie The Matrix. And so we watch it, and of course we get to a scene, and I don't want to be a spoiler in case anyone hasn't seen it, but there's a scene where a man named Morpheus, who is the god of dreams, right, actually holds his hand out, and in one hand is a red pill and one hand is a blue pill. So we have the juxtaposition between the red pill, the blue pill, the woman in the red dress, the woman in the blue dress, all coming into play for me in 24 hours. So then we start to sit and go, what choice point am I at? Where am I going? What is it that I need to understand about this? And I just want to share one more deep synchronicity. And, every time I teach something, I always get to experience it myself. So this last week and a half has been just, if I wasn't tapping into synchronicities before, it's just been coming so quickly when we start to open ourselves and say, I really want to be shown how deep this actually goes, how interconnected we really are. So I was conducting a video interview with a colleague, another mentor, for an online event that I'm putting on, and she invited me to take a quiz. She has an archetype quiz. So I was excited about that, and I found out that I am a creatrix. And in her interpretation, the creatrix folks are souls who came here to help humanity usher in a new timeline. If there's all these different timelines, all these different choice points that we could make, how do we go down a path that is more healthy and equitable and earth honoring and affirming for everyone? And so I realized as I was talking with her that I've always been able to move fluidly between the past and the present and the future, and know that shifting one thing kind of impacts the entire timeline. You can change a generational pattern. You can reframe something that happened in the past and feel very differently about how that impacts in the future. And so I was stepping into this other realization of self, right? Like, wow, what if I'm a creatrix, and what if I generate through this creative flow, and I help people, choose a timeline. And this morning, here's who showed up in my reading: the Time Master, right? He has an infinity symbol right here. And the interpretation of this card is that time is not linear. It is a spiral. We continue to go around. And as a matter of fact, we kind of joked about this at the beginning. Someone had put in the chat that I get to make decisions time and again, because sometimes we don't have a full understanding of something the very first time we experience it. We need to dive deeper, and we need to go around that spiral and have that experience again. So this is an example of how the universe works. Like, you literally cannot make this stuff up. This is how it works. And, we grew up to believe that we're all separate. And of course, a lot of our society tells us that life is random. And what I'll say about this is, I'm never here to tell anyone what to believe. You get to choose your beliefs, your choices that feel good for you, that feel right for you. But society as a general rule, especially as we move into a more scientific and technological based society, says that life is random, that we are just cells, we're just atoms, that we kind of randomly came together, there was a big bang, or all these things. And it's fine for us to look at all of those kind of explanations. And often what we do as humans is we try to explain things through simple principles. It's either this or it's that. What I've personally come to see in my time on this planet is that it's incredibly complex, right? That we are a vital, animated energy life force in a vast ecosystem. And we can only see certain parts of it. We can only see, what it is from our perspective. And so if we think about, for example, and I know that Terry, you passed on a meme to me the other day about, how many ancestors do you have? You have 2 parents, and then you have 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents, and it goes on and on. If you think about the circumstances that would have led all of those people to meet, to have your great-grandparents who had your grandparents, who had your parents, who had you, what led up to your conception and birth, how many people in your ancestry had to be at exactly the right time and place so that you could be sitting here and listening to this right now. Think of all the people who are special to you in your life, or you've intersected with, whether that's colleagues or friends or romantic partners, and think of the set of circumstances that had to come into play so that you could be there in each other's lives. Or consider all the different new opportunities, whether that's new jobs, a new place to live, new people that you met. what preparations were you making before that moment when you intersected that you didn't even realize you were making, right? What choices were you making that led you to that place? What were the doors that had to close? Like, plucking the 3 hairs and laying them down, making space for a new door to open to be where you are right now. So personally, I believe that the universe is not random. I believe that seeing repeated numbers or symbols or reading something in a book and then having someone talk about it or seeing it on a billboard or whatever, it's not random. These things are meaningful. Now, we don't always understand what they mean, and that's okay. This is a part of becoming fluent in the language of energy, right? Everything is energy. And so these are arising and we're becoming fluent in that language. Now, does that mean that I believe that everything is fated? No. I believe that we have free will and we can choose whether to watch and listen to the whispering and sometimes the shouts. Sometimes the universe is sending me shouts, right? It's like, hey, pay attention, that happen in every moment of every day. And we can either move towards what feels great and aligned and resonant and what's meant for us, or we can shrink away, or we can decide to ignore it altogether. And there was a good portion of my life where I was ignoring it, or sometimes these things that were coming up were scary to me. It's like, what's that? No, I don't really want to know that. I don't really want to believe that. I don't really want to tap into that. And so it's fine wherever we are in this process of opening ourselves to be fluent in the language of energy. We will continue to get these messages, and especially highly intuitive people tend to notice them more often. We are pattern recognizers. We can see how all these things intersect and we can see them come in and we're like, wow, isn't that fascinating? Sometimes it feels a little scary, right? So let's take an example here. Let's say that all of a sudden you begin seeing giraffes everywhere, right? You see a stuffed animal at the store, and then you turn on your TV and there's a wildlife documentary that features giraffes. And then you're driving down the road and you see a logo on a truck that's a giraffe. You're like, why in the world is giraffe coming up for me? I don't even live near giraffes. But what if this is not a coincidence, right? What if this is not a coincidence? And you could ask yourself, what does giraffe mean? What does it mean? And, there's many, many websites, and I've used these. Or you can say giraffe is a spirit animal. What is the spiritual meaning of giraffe? And you can get some interpretations, and then you sort through and you go, okay, that one kind of feels right to me. This one doesn't. But you also have the ability to just sense into yourself, and you can ask that question of your inner wisdom, your higher self, your guides, whatever you believe in. And there might be some universally agreed upon characteristics of a giraffe, but each person who sees this pattern might have a different interpretation depending on what's happening in your life. So one person could say, I see the giraffe's long neck, right? They have this immensely long neck, and it has the ability to reach the tops of the trees. And it can get resources that other animals who are smaller, shorter, cannot access. So maybe this is a sign to this person that it's time for them to stretch themselves, right? It's time to reach for something that they never thought they could have. But they will be nourished by those tender, new shoots that are coming out at the top of the tree. Another person could look at the giraffe's kind of long, lanky legs and its sort of awkward gait and think, man, it'll only take like one rock or tree that's in the path to have it crash down to the ground and struggle to get up. A giraffe may not feel stable to someone, depending on what's happening in their life. Or another person might reflect on kind of the dappled pattern of the fur and how the giraffe's fur allows it to blend into the savanna, into its environment, and wonder, have I been kind of blending in and camouflaging myself too much to try to fit in? So you could see that one kind of occurrence could be interpreted in several different ways. And when we receive intuitive, synchronistic messages, the interpretations are going to be personal to you. So I have a few questions to ask you before we enter into our group dialogue as we do in these sessions. Have you been keeping your eyes open? When you see something, a color, a symbol, a storyline, a metaphor, a strange word that you don't use very often, are you keeping your eyes open? Are you watching for how things are talking to you? Are you listening and observing these things? I kind of see them as clues, right? Sometimes they're clues to where we go next. Sometimes I think they're validation, right? It's like, oh, okay. When I'm reading this book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and the wolf spirit shows up like 3 or 4 times, it's like, yes, keep reading the book. There's something important. And this morning I kept reading the book, and it was really important for me to hear that because I had gone through so much in 2021, being a caregiver, writing a book, moving, that it was okay for me to have gone through a period of downtime, of rest, because, in our society, it tells us, well, you need to be hustling and you need to be working and you're not, productive and all those things. And even though I teach about those things, I still needed to have that validation. So intuition can be a clue, it can be validation, or it can reveal a pattern, a cycle that you've been going through that maybe you want to shift into a different choice point. Can you sense when something shifts in the collective, whether that's culturally, astrologically, energetically, environmentally? There's lots of ways, but are you tapping into that? So sometimes, we get into this thing where we're saying, oh my gosh, Mercury retrograde is coming. It's going to be horrible. And you say, well, what if it's not? What if I'm able to tune in astrologically? Or, we're coming into a new season of the year, and I can embrace that energy, whether it's the new growth in the spring, or the full blossoming in the summer, or the beginning to have things die away in the autumn, and then the rest period and the hibernation in the winter. Like, can I just move with that rather than fighting against it, right? So when we understand that as intuitive people, we can sense in, and empathic people, we can sense in to these shifts, and flow with them rather than, reject them, be scared about them. They might bring things that feel unusual, but at some level we know and understand, or wouldn't have been coming forward. And, there's a time sometimes when something wants to be spoken. We say something floats out of my mouth, and another person's like, yeah, that is exactly what I needed to hear. And I had no idea why I was going to say that. I had no idea that this thing was going to come out. And sometimes it's really unusual. One time it was like talking about sparkles, and another time it was talking about something else. I'm like, why did I even say that? It wasn't in my mind. It wasn't in my brain. But when we allow ourselves to be that conduit, we can actually help people connect to this ability to recognize and honor synchronicity, honor the interconnected web that we're all a part of. What if you considered that intuitive, repetitive patterns hold important meanings? And maybe they aren't coincidences. Maybe they are. I mean, sometimes I'll watch like an online tarot reading. And of course, it's for a collective group of people. And some parts of it don't resonate with me. And I go, oh, that was for somebody else. But then there'll be just, one phrase, just like in this book, where they'll say something and I'm like, that was for me. I know that was for me. Thank you. And that, I've looked at readings that were a year old and it still had a phrase for me. And so this is where we can tap in. We can tap into these synchronicities and these archetypes. And my final example is this morning. I usually make a cup of tea in the morning, and the tea bags that I use have these little messages, these little spiritual messages on it. So I wanted to read this to you in closing. Be guided. Listen to the whispers of the universe.